Konrad Curze, later known as Night Hunter, was one of the 20 Primarchs created by the Emperor of Mankind in the depths of the Imperium's secret laboratories. Like his brothers, he was scattered across the galaxy during the cataclysmic warp storm that tore through the Emperor's gene-seeding project. Curze landed on the dark, oppressive world of Nostramo, a planet shrouded in perpetual night and ruled by corruption and despair. Unlike many of his brothers, who were found and nurtured by families or mentors, Curze was left to survive alone amidst the cruelty of the world. From his earliest days, he was plagued by disturbing visions, prophetic glimpses of a grim future that shaped his life and scarred his psyche. Raised in solitude, Curze became a vigilante of sorts, hunting down and executing the corrupt and the criminal elements that thrived in the festering underbelly of Nostramo society. His methods were brutal and bloody. He struck with the calculated precision of a predator. Bodies of gang leaders and corrupt officials would be left hanging as grisly warnings, their deaths too violent to attribute to anything human. His reign of terror was relentless, and the city he patrolled began to whisper of a creature that haunted the shadows, a dark avenger known as the Night Hunter. Over time, this gruesome crusade extended from Nostramo Quintus to the entire planet, imposing a reign of terror-fueled order that eventually stabilized the crime-ridden world. Despite the dread his name invoked, Curze was not driven solely by malice. He genuinely sought to create order, to cleanse the darkness from his homeworld. Yet, every victory came at a terrible price, and his methods grew increasingly sadistic and uncontrollable. As Curze matured, he became the monarch of Nostramo, ruling through fear and spectacle. He brought the entire world to heel, turning it from a hellish nightmare into a society of terrified obedience. His unorthodox approach brought stability but at the cost of his own sanity. When the Emperor arrived, it was both a relief and a curse to the tormented Primarch. The Emperor's appearance was something Curze had long foreseen in his tortured visions. Clad in divine gold armor and radiating power, the Emperor came to Nostramo with the light of hope and conquest. Unlike other Primarchs, Curze did not bow or offer gratitude. Instead, he stood before his father and proclaimed that he knew exactly what fate awaited them all. The Emperor, recognizing Curze's tortured mind and unique gifts, extended his hand, naming him Konrad Curze and declaring him a son of the Imperium. Despite this recognition, Curze's acceptance was tainted by the foreknowledge of his own tragic destiny. Following his induction into the ranks of the Emperor's sons, Konrad Curze took command of the 8th Legion, known as the Nightlords. The warriors of the 8th Legion had always been a troubled, violent force recruited from the criminal underbelly of Terra. When Curze joined them, he found a legion without direction or cohesion, a fragmented force plagued by internal strife. His first act as their Primarch was to impose a sense of brutal order and discipline. The transformation was swift and severe. Curze forged his legion in his own image, teaching them the value of fear as a weapon. Where once they were undisciplined marauders, they became the galaxy's most feared enforcers, terrorizing those who defied imperial compliance. Under Curze, the 8th Legion embraced a new identity as the Nightlords, masters of psychological warfare and brutality, feared for the darkness they brought to every battlefield. Curze's most notable campaign during the Great Crusade was the pacification of the Charad system. Tasked with bringing the rebellious world into compliance, Curze led his legion in a campaign that would become a grim example of his unique methodology. Charad was a strategically important system, its forges proving vital resources to nurgle imperial territories. The ruling elite of the planet had refused to swear allegiance, believing that the Imperium would not risk damaging the vital industry. Curze, however, was indifferent to such considerations. He ordered the Nightlords to launch a campaign of terror, targeting not just military installation but also civilian populations. The Nightlords descended like shadows upon Charad, unleashing a reign of terror that broke the will of the populace. Entire cities were depopulated in a matter of days, their streets filled with the mangled remains of those who dared resist. In the end, Charad surrendered, not out of respect or a desire for peace, but out of pure, unrelenting fear. The ruthlessness Curze displayed during the Charad campaign earned him the ire of many of his brothers. Rogoldorn and Gilliman, in particular, were appalled by his willingness to annihilate civilian populations. To them, Curze was a rabid beast, his methods tainting the honor of the Imperium. Even Horus, who valued compliance above all, found Curze's approach distasteful, though he admitted its effectiveness. For Curze, the condemnation of his brothers meant little. He viewed them as hypocrites, blind to the harsh truths of the galaxy. He argued that his methods, while brutal, were necessary to bring lasting order. Despite the criticism, none could deny that wherever the Nightlords went, compliance was swift and absolute. Curze's philosophy of using fear as a tool was one the Emperor never openly endorsed but did not actively forbid, leaving Curze in a liminal state between condemnation and acceptance. His relationship with his brothers was fraught with tension. While some, like Fulgrim and Engram, could at least appreciate his results, they kept him at a distance, wary of his volatile nature. Only Lorgar, in his early years, seemed to show any genuine interest in Curze's worldview. The two would engage in long, philosophical debates about the nature of fate and free will, with Lorgar attempting to sway Curze towards a more spiritual path. But these discussions ultimately only deepened Curze's isolation, for where Lorgar saw the hand of God shaping destiny, Curze saw only the ineffable darkness within mankind's soul. His rivalry with Vulcan was particularly intense, sparked by their contrasting views on warfare and justice. During one campaign, Curze even attempted to provoke Vulcan into killing him, believing that death at the hands of his brother would be a fitting punishment for the monster he had become. Vulcan refused, leaving Curze with a bitter sense of vindication for his view that none of his brothers truly understood him or the burden he carried. As the shadow of the Horus Heresy fell over the Imperium, Konrad Curze's descent into madness reached its apex. Swayed by his prophetic visions, Curze was among the first to side with War Master Horus. The Night Hunter saw the heresy as the inevitable unraveling of the Emperor's grand design, a collapse that he had long foreseen. Despite joining Horus, Curze harbored no loyalty to the War Master himself. For Curze, the war was not about power or vengeance, but about vindication. Every atrocity committed by the Nightlords was a twisted testament to the truth of his visions, a dark reflection of the Imperium's hidden wrath. During the drop site massacre on Istvan V, Curze's brutal efficiency was displayed in full force. Alongside his traitorous brothers, he launched a devastating assault on the Loyalist legions, reveling in the fear and confusion that spread across the battlefield. His confrontation with Corax of the Raven Guard was particularly significant. The two shared more similarities than differences, but while Corax clung to the ideals of justice and honor, Curze had long embraced the darkness within. Their battle was a tragic clash of two fallen angels, each embodying the shadow of the other. In the wake of Istvan, Curze's campaign of terror spread unchecked through the Thramas sector, where he waged a harrowing war against the Dark Angels. The sector was drowned in blood and darkness as Curze led his forces in a relentless guerrilla war, striking and disappearing like a ghost. His cat-and-mouse game with Lion L. Johnson culminated in a personal confrontation on Tuat Galsa, where Curze's prophecy seemed to falter for the first time. Flashed across the throat by the Legion, he was left in a comatose state, broken and humiliated, while his Legion began to splinter without his guidance. When Curze finally recovered, he found his forces shattered and divided. The once feared Nightlords were now a scattered collection of warbands, each led by a warlord vying for dominance. Enraged and bitter, Curze launched one final gambit. He infiltrated the flagship of the Dark Angels, the Invincible Reason, and began a reign of terror within its dark halls, slaughtering search teams and evading capture for weeks. His presence drove the Lion to the brink of madness, further underscoring Curze's role as the harbinger of death and despair, even when all seemed lost for the traitors. Following the defeat of Horus and the scattering of the traitor legions, Konrad Curze found himself alone and abandoned by his brothers. The Nightlords, fractured beyond repair, drifted into the depths of the galaxy, sowing fear wherever they went but lacking any true purpose. Curze himself retreated to the world of Zagwalsa, a haunted relic of his former empire. There, surrounded by the shattered remains of his once mighty legion, he fell into despair and self-loathing, tormented by the knowledge that his own nature had been his undoing. Curze's final days were marked by his growing obsession with the Emperor's judgment. Despite his hatred for his father, he longed for a form of absolution, believing that his death would serve as a final vindication of all he had seen and suffered. His prophetic visions, once so clear and immutable, began to blur. The line between destiny and choice faded, and for the first time, Curze began to question whether he had truly been a puppet of fate or merely a monster of his own making. The Emperor, or perhaps a shadow of him, visited Curze in his final moments. In this vision, the Emperor did not condemn his wayward son, but instead offered a tragic absolution. Curze had been a tool of fear, shaped by a world that had demanded his cruelty. Yet, as the Emperor spoke, he challenged Curze's fatalism. Was this path truly yours, my son, or did you choose it? The Emperor seemed to ask. The vision left Curze with a sliver of doubt. Perhaps he had been more than the sum of his suffering. Ultimately, it was not a grand battle or a heroic stand that ended the Night Hunter's life. Instead, it was the quiet knife of an assassin, sent by the very Imperium he had sought to humble. As the assassin Meshan approached, Curze offered no resistance. His final words, spoken with a strange calm, encapsulated the tragic essence of his existence. Death is nothing compared to vindication. And with that, the Lord of Night passed into legend, his shattered legion scattered to the winds, and his dark prophecies echoing through the annals of history.